Thanks. I'm going to be talking about our project at Texas A&M University for enhancing discovery for dissertations using Wikidata. First, I'm going to give some background about the PCC Wikidata Pilot, which this project was part of. So for those of you not in the library world, the PCC stands for a Program for Cooperative Cataloging. It's an international cooperative effort aimed at expanding access to library collections. And one of its purposes is to provide usefully, timely, and cost-effective cataloging. But the important thing is that it oversees programs for its members, mostly libraries, to contribute high-quality metadata that is shared globally among libraries. So while this includes bibliographic metadata, it also includes authority data about people, organizations, places, and topics. And so the pilot started in September 2020 and was extended to the end of December 2021, although it was originally intended to run for 1 year. So the pilot fulfills two of the current strategic directions that the PCC is taking. One is to help its members understand how to apply linked data. So it recognizes that the GLAM world is moving towards linked data. And if libraries are going to successfully transition to this new environment, we need a shared interactive space to experiment, learn, and collaborate. So we can kind of get our hands dirty and knowing how to apply linked data, as well as the tools, and have a kind of community where we can exchange ideas. And secondly, another direction was to accelerate the movement towards ubiquitous identifier creation and identity management at the network level. So there's also recognition that if libraries are going to start to work with linked data, we need to change some things about our traditional practices. So up until now, our traditional practice for authority control was to rely on unique text strings for names, like this example I gave on my slide for John Smith, and his birth and death dates to kind of distinguish him from the other John Smiths that are in our catalog. But if we're going to shift to manage identities in a linked data world, we need to shift our focus to center more on persistent identifiers rather than on controlled text strings. And so why Wikidata? Well, I think it has become and is recognized as a high demand identifier hub and reconciliation service that has really taken off in the last few years. It's very widely used, widely known, and has strong community support and buy-in, and that was very important for the PCC. And so the goals of our pilot was to compare, what they stated its goals very broadly. One was to compare it with other registries and tools that we use in the library world, and kind of see how it would integrate within our workflows and to find best practices. And another one was that they encouraged us to assess productivity and quality assurance tools. So we were encouraged to explore automated tools that were out there that would help us do batch processing and loading and that sort of thing. And finally, to learn the community's culture. So at the Texas A&M Libraries, our goal for our project was to gain familiarity with Wikidata and its tools. Since when we first began, we were very new to it. Also to compare the process of creating items in Wikidata with our traditional authority control process that we use to manage the names of persons and organizations in our catalog. And also we wanted to demonstrate the value of linked data by taking advantage of Wikidata's query service to explore relationships among the entities we create. And that way we could show our colleagues and our administration in the library, here's what linked data can do if they were not siloed within our catalog, to kind of get more buy-in towards the idea of linked data. And ultimately, we wanted to expose data about our collections and researchers on the wider web to make them more discoverable. And this pilot seemed like the perfect way to kind of start experimenting with how to do that. So as for the background of our project, I'm going to start by saying who we are. We serve a very large campus. On our campus alone, 67,100 students, according to our fall enrollment figures. We have a good-sized collection of 5.8 million volumes and a lot of e-resources as well. And we've been a member of the PCC for the last 2 decades. So we got involved when it first got going in September 2020. participation at Texas A&M was on a voluntary basis. So among our librarians, we have 5 of them participating. So 4 from the metadata management unit, which is our cataloging unit in our main library. Also 1 librarian from the Cushing Memorial Library, which is where we house our special collections and archives. So these 5 were the people who participated. To familiarize ourselves at the beginning, we enrolled in the Wikidata Institute course in the fall of 2020 that was taught by Will Kent. And since the beginning of the pilot, we've attended monthly meetings for PCC participants, as well as kept up with his discussions on the listserv. So our project, we had several possibilities, but we decided to focus on faculty advisors, doctoral students, and their dissertations from our Department of Mechanical Engineering. And while we began by manually creating items in Wikidata just to get a feel for it, we just ultimately decided it would be better to reuse metadata that we already had about them in our repository, which we call Oak Trust, as well as our VIVO database, which consists of scholarly profiles of faculty members that are at Texas A&M. So our Oak Trust repository has a large collection of what we call ETDs. We decided to select a subset of the doctoral dissertations in mechanical engineering for our project. And since there was only 5 of us, we had to whittle this down further. So we ended up with 72 faculty members in our sample that appeared frequently as advisors in Oak Trust, as well as their students that had ORCID IDs recorded in Oak Trust. And so we ended up with a list of 217 doctoral students and their dissertations. So the idea was to reuse existing metadata as much as we could to create base items in Wikidata that we could later enhance if we wanted to. So we started out by downloading metadata from Oak Trust for our sample, and then gradually throughout the year, we kind of divided up the tasks and got them all uploaded into Wikidata using OpenRefine. Once we did that, we identified additional information that we might want to add in VIVO. And so we also requested a download of that and uploaded information mostly regarding educational background into Wikidata for faculty advisors. Throughout this process, we continued to create authority records for the researchers, and also we linked the authority records up to the Wikidata items by including the Wikidata ID in our authority records as well. And as for the records we created for the researchers, we also made sure that we linked back to the Library of Congress authority record. So if you go and look up one for our researchers, for instance, you're likely to find that. And also if you click on that, it'll take you to the linked data version of the authority record maintained by the Library of Congress linked data service. So this way you can kind of see how we're kind of doing things in parallel and kind of doing reciprocal linking at this stage. And finally, we continue to add information that we couldn't get from Oak Trust or VIVO, and we're doing this manually. And these are things that would be potentially of interest for Sparkle queries. And here's the authority record, and that's an example of the Wikidata URI that we added here that I've highlighted. So right now, I'm just going to go really quickly through the process of how we imported and reconciled data from Oak Trust and OpenRefine. So we used the Wikidata extension in OpenRefine that lets us do that. So these are kind of screenshots showing you the process of how the process looked like. So you can see it searches for a match in Wikidata, then runs several options by us, and we say, yes, this is the person that we're looking for if it matches. And if there is no match, then it allows us the option to select new item. And so once we go and batch upload all our Wikidata edits in an OpenRefine to Wikidata, it'll automatically generate records in Wikidata for all the ones that we identified as needing a new match. So here we reconcile the first column. We do that for all the data we're interested in, and then we uploaded a schema that we created. And here's just a screenshot of what it looked like for faculty advisors, doctoral students, and their dissertations. So you can kind of see how we're kind of reusing the content of what is already in that spreadsheet that we downloaded from Oak Trust to form triples or statements to be uploaded to Wikidata. Also, here's a screenshot of a schema that we use to link the items we created for dissertations as well as the ones we created for their authors, kind of as a separate step after those two entities were put on Wikidata. As for VIVO, this is a screenshot of what the raw data looked like once we had asked them to, our digital initiative staff, to download the metadata for the properties we were interested in. You can see a lot of this was things like the type of degree they have, what they majored in, what school they attended to that conferred the degree, and the year they graduated. So that information was also input into VIVO, and here's what the schema looked like for this background of educational information. When we also added academic appointment for the Department of Mechanical Engineering. So now I'm going to go into our use of mix and match. So after we added all this information in a kind of semi-automated way, there was some extra information that we didn't deem as essential, but could possibly be useful, like awards, for instance. Scholia actually tracks that information, so that might be of interest. And also fellowships, like endowed professorships, chairs, that kind of thing, as well as affiliations with units that they might have outside mechanical engineering. So we decided these might be useful to import, but we decided to tackle each one of them separately, and also decided that we wanted to make sure that these were in Wikidata first before we attempted to link them up with the faculty advisors, because we found out that OpenRefine is not great at linking up existing entities in Wikidata with ones that are being newly created at the same time. So it's a good idea to establish them first, then try to link them up later. So mix and match seemed like the ideal tool to help us with this task, because many of you may be familiar with it, but for those who haven't, it's another tool to reconcile entities with what is in Wikidata, to look for matches and help us create new items if they are missing. Doesn't do it in batch though, but other than that, it does things that are very similar to what OpenRefine does. So we could have two options. One is to batch load a list of names of persons or awards, whatever you're working with, or one may scrape data from an existing resource on the web. So what we did was we opted for the first option, that is we batch loaded a CSV spreadsheet of a list of awards. And we assumed that the list of, and one thing that mix and match assumes is that these entities are already represented in an external source it calls a catalog. And so our catalog for this case was VIVO, which had pages for each award. And there's good documentation for how to use it if you've never used it before. And we also found a tutorial video helpful that was on the Mix and Match website itself. So here's a screenshot of the CSV file that we use. So really, the only required columns are ID and the name. You could add other things like a description, the URL. In this case, the URL goes to where something is described at. That goes to the VIVO page for the award. You could add type, which would populate instance of. And so if something was either an award or a medal, so we kind of made a distinction between them. And finally, the last P property in the column on the screen is for official website. So if we knew there was an official website, we added that. Imported this spreadsheet into mix and match, and here's how the data set looked after we imported it. Actually, this is what it looked like when we were about halfway done. And so when we first started, the fully matched category, the ones which mix and match was 100% sure matched, that was almost empty. Almost none of these awards were in Wikidata. Preliminarily matched were things that mix and match thinks are on Wikidata, but isn't 100% certain, so that will require us to review it. And but the category we spent the most time on was the unmatched one, things that mix and match could not find anything in Wikidata. So you click on that. This is the kind of a screenshot showing you what it looks like. So it has various options, buttons you can push, links you can push, click on that allows you to search Wikidata yourself to see whether it's in there, as well as things you can do research on, like search the Wikipedia, search Google. And if you find enough information to create a record and there's nothing that in Wikidata that you can find, you can always hit new item. So here I've highlighted the Arthur Holly Compton Award in Education. So if you click new item and that appears, you know that a new item has been generated. Click on that. and it takes you to a minimal record, or skeleton record, if you might think about it that way. This is a minimal record containing what I had in that spreadsheet. So instance of, it has what I put for that. It described at URL, it has a link to VIVO that I put in the original spreadsheet. And if it had an official website, that would be there too. And so we would go take this record and we would use the information we found from our Google searches and then enhance this record. So if you went in there and looked for the same award in Wikidata now, you would find it looking much fuller than it appears on the screen. Things we've learned so far. First of all, at the very beginning of this project, we kind of studied application profiles of other participants in the pilot who were doing similar things to us. And then we got together and kind of created our own application profile, drafts that is, designated which properties we thought were essential or core that should always be in these Wikidata items we were creating. And it turned out that they could be most of them could be semi-automated using the metadata we already had in Oak Trust and VIVO. However, there were some exceptions. One of them was sex and gender, and we went back and forth about whether we should include this at all. But when we consulted with colleagues in the scholarly communications unit, for instance, they actually said it was of interest to them because they were interested in pulling demographic information. So we ended up including that if we could find a reference with the use of pronouns, but we couldn't. Obviously, it was not something that was in our repository or in VIVO. As for given names and family names, they were readily available in VIVO, but we ran into a kind of a situation where a lot of these people were not originally from the United States. We had a lot of Asian names, and many of them had more than one match in Wikidata. So it's not something that we could easily reconcile unless we had additional language expertise. So we kind of didn't include those when we batch loaded things to Open Refine. The only core properties we could not automate for doctoral students were ones that had to do with what they did after they graduated, and I'll show you an example of that on a later slide. As for dissertations, we were able to automate all the core elements except for main subject. So there are a lot of subject keywords in Oak Trust, but the problem is that they did not reconcile well in Open Refine. There are too many of them, and it kind of slowed things down and made things very inefficient. So if we were going to go back and add them, then we would need human intervention to determine what the main subject actually is for a thesis before it could be added, and hopefully that would make it more manageable. But we couldn't add all of them the way they appeared in the original metadata. And on this screen, it shows you on the left side the properties we were able to export from Oak Trust for faculty members. And on the right side, it shows you the ones we could export from VIVO. And on this screen, it shows you the properties we could export from Oak Trust for doctoral students. And on the right side, it shows you the ones we couldn't. That had to do with what they did after they graduated. So did they become an engineer, or did they become a professor and enter academia? Who did they work for after they left? Field of work, did they continue in the field of mechanical engineering? Work location, did they move back to their original countries of origin? Did they join the faculty at Texas A&M, which some of them actually did? And that was a shame, because a lot of these were things that a lot of our colleagues told us they were interested in finding out this information. We have met our goal, in that one of our goals in that we have become familiar with automated tools. We started to become familiar with Open Refine and Mix and Match, as well as learn about their limitations. We found it really helpful to divide up the work, since there was only 5 of us and we have tons of other obligations and assignments as you'd expect. And we found it helpful to break it down to 10 to 20 names at a time. But there's still a lot of elements, mostly that we deemed as optional, that we could add that would be useful for Sparkle queries. And we are actually starting to add them. So on the screen, I have examples of the type of information like start and end dates. Other languages they may speak in, if they were originally from another country, other institutions they have worked for, and so on. Which leads us to, but this requires a lot of manual research on finding what's in their LinkedIn profiles. But actually we found that online information like this is actually plentiful for researchers at Texas A&M. It just takes time to actually do the research. Which leads us to a question: how much of this is really necessary? How much of this is really useful? And if one batch loads in data to Wikidata, it's also manual cleanup is still necessary. To check the item afterwards and delete any duplicate statements, as well as duplicate items. In this case, we found a few when we also merged them. But I would say we have increased the potential for discovery for researchers because at the start of the project, most of them were not in Wikidata. So now all of them in our sample are added and are beginning to show up on websites like Scholia. So if you go to this link here, you can see visualizations of, based on the information we added, like a map representation of where they went to school, where they taught. And you can also see visualizations such as a timeline of where they got different degrees at different institutions they attended, as well as a visualization about all the doctoral students they advised. And at the start of the project, slightly over half had a presence in the authority file. But so since then, all of them have had authorities created for them that have been linked up to Wikidata. And at the start of the project, almost none of the doctoral students had authority records, and I don't think any of them were in Wikidata. So at least now they have a linked data presence on Wikidata with persistent IDs and links to their dissertations and advisors. So that's a start. As for comparing working in Wikidata with our traditional authority control processes, we found working Wikidata is a lot easier. No surprise, since it's a lot more flexible, and other than property constraints, we don't have to adhere so strictly to rules that we do when under our traditional authority control work. For instance, for authority control, we have to have strict citations, including usage of exactly how a name appeared. In Wikidata, all we have to do is to provide the URL to reference where we got a name from. Also, we don't have to make names unique in Wikidata and but in a traditional authority control, all the names have to be unique. S is, for instance, here for Ya Wang in the authority control data, S, his middle initial, is assigned that to make his authority control string unique. So we can't add more information about it since we're told not to anticipate conflict. And according to PCC policy, while we could add mechanical engineering to kind of break the conflict, it puts it lower in the hierarchy, and we're restricted as to when we can do this. So does his middle initial S help you identify Ya Wang, the mechanical engineer, from everybody else that shares his name? Maybe not so much, right? Unless you knew S was his middle initial. In a lot of cases, we don't necessarily have that information. However, in the world of linked data, things have the potential to change. And so there could be a lot of other information, for instance, that we could pull from this researcher's Wikidata item that we could use in future discovery tool displays that would help people disambiguate the person's identity, saying, okay, this is Ya Wang, the mechanical engineering from Texas A&M, and not Ya Wang in some other field that's completely unrelated. Which leads us to some questions. So if we're going to incorporate Wikidata into our authority control processes, we agree that it's a lot easier. It could possibly lower the barrier for more people to participate in this activity, but there's going to be a need for best practices. So there will probably be a continuing conversation for a long time within the library community about this. But some questions that emerged for us was what information is actually needed or most helpful for identification of a person or anything else that you put on Wikidata. And in our case, our project dealt with researchers in an academic setting. Would this information differ for people in other domains? I believe there's a presentation later on the day on the performing arts, for instance. So that information might differ. And is there any other purposes besides identify that would justify putting information on Wikidata? So once we start playing with the Sparkle query service in Wikidata, I think that will be very revealing about what kind of information, what other information might be useful. Finally, does it make sense for some information to be put in Wikidata rather than in the library authority control records, and the other way around? At the very beginning, I mentioned that one of the one of the things that the PCC does is aim for efficiency and providing a high quality metadata that so other people don't have to fix it. It can be right the first time. And so we probably don't want to have redundant workflows where we do the exact same thing twice. And so this would be an important question, at least for practical purposes for us, for our workflows. So here are our next steps. We want to finish adding the award data using mix and match. And once we're done, we'll link them up to faculty advisors that we've already put on Wikidata. And we will do the same thing for the list of professorships and faculty affiliations from VIVO. And we are also in the process of enhancing our Wikidata items for dissertations with a new property for dissertation program. That is the Department of Mechanical Engineering, where the dissertation that the doctoral students were affiliated with. And also, we plan to learn about Sparkle and try our hand at creating some queries in the Wikidata querying service. And lastly, we intend to finalize our internal documentation that we on our processes and share them with the rest of the PCC community. And once we've done that, they will also be publicly available for everyone else to look at as well. So I want to thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at this email address. And that's it.